Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?
This whole party.
Down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
You down with D&D?
Yeah, you know me.
I'm down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?
This whole party.
Welcome to Down with D&D. My name is Shawn Merwin, and I have with me again for the episode I am calling Alpha 3 because it is the third official episode with Alpha Stream Teos and Shawn. Hey, Alpha Stream, how's it going?
Hey, Shawn, how is the Mad Wizard?
I'm doing okay. In the midst of a lot of writing, which is awesome and also horrifying. You know how it is.
Yeah, I do know how it is, and I'm glad you're doing the good work.
Yeah, I am certainly trying. But while I was doing some writing this weekend, you were doing some DMing and a little bit of playing. You want to tell us how Gen Con Online went?
It was great. The nitty-gritty details is that we ran 3 tables in Spanish, as we talked about last week, and we're going to have to adjust things to get more people there and make it accessible for those groups.
Yeah.
I played in 3 Moonshade Isles D&D games. Those were awesome.
Yep.
Including a special, which was amazing to see people online use a combination of Twitch streams and multiple Discord channels and everything to pull together different tables and make it feel like different tables were playing together.
Yeah. How'd that work out?
Yeah, it was pretty good. Yeah, and there are some groups that I guess have been doing this off and on for a while. So there were folks like Ted Atkinson and Krishna was there, and a number of other heroes who have experience with this. My DM was Laura Thompson.
Okay.
She's awesome. So it was great. We had a really good time. I played a Cypher System game from their Stars Are on Fire series, kind of space exploration, derelict spacecraft type thing. That was a lot of fun.
How'd that run with? Did you run it like D20 or Roll20, or did you do Theater of the Mind or?
Yeah, the Cypher game was Theater of the Mind using Zoom.
Okay.
I played one game on Fantasy Grounds. That was my first time playing there, and then played everything else on Roll20.
Okay, cool. I was just wondering how other systems, if they're on a virtual tabletop, how they work. But it sounds like it was just sort of Zoom for the Cypher System game.
Yeah, though I think all kinds of tools are used. Like I was talking to somebody in that Cypher game, and we were comparing how our Gen Cons were, and they were on the board game track. And I sort of thought to myself mentally, like, wait, the board game track really happens? And they're like, yeah, we use Roll20 a lot. And then there's Tabletop Simulator and all these other tools so you can do virtual stuff. And, there are all these ways to do it, right?
That's awesome.
But it warmed my heart. It really just very quickly say that it was really very good to see how Gen Con Online worked and brought people together. And my tables were full of people who were new to Gen Con, who said, I could never come here before.
Mm-hmm.
Or who said, this is my first time playing Adventures League. Most of my players for Cypher were new to Cypher.
Mm.
So, it was, and I was a player, but, I made it sound like it was a game. But, it was really cool. It made me feel like I came out of this feeling really positive about the hobby and that online conventions can work.
Yeah.
And did a great job.
And that does warm my heart, too, the fact that there were new players, new to the game system, new to the convention scene, Gen Con, new to Adventures League. That's what you hope for when you have this sort of twist in the hierarchy of how things work. You want to take the good that can be had out of it, with all the bad that is happening, and make it something, at least something positive. And it sounds like it was a positive experience for a lot of people.
Yeah, it really was. It was great.
I know
the
that
charity angle, right?
Oh yeah. I know. Baldman Games reported that they ran over 500 events in 4 different languages with thousands of players, and they raised over or almost $20,000 for charity. So, as Dave Chris said, it was super groovy. So, and that's great, right? Not only
really
is that happening, but $20,000 for charity is nothing to sneeze at. And for me, it'll be interesting to see, as more of these conventions run an online presence. We have PAX Online coming up soon. How it's going to change their way of running things when and if we get back to normal. So when Gen Con is back in Indy, with their 70, 80, 90, 100,000 people at the downtown area, are they still going to offer these online games? And if
And
so,
I'm hearing yes.
yeah,
That's what I hear from, their event organizer and people like
yeah,
that. They're saying, yeah, this is we need to expand this way.
yeah. And then the next step is combining the two, being able to play online with people who are physically at the show. And if you can do that, then you've got the best of all worlds.
Pretty incredible.
Yeah. So the next thing I wanted to talk about, since we do news here, but we also look at things that we see online. DM David, a favorite of yours, Teos, and mine, had an amazing article, blog post about 3 actions that D&D players want that defy the game's design choices. And this I always read DM David stuff, and I just this is exactly right. I've thought this, but I've never taken the time to sit down and put it together in a coherent way. And he just does it so smoothly, and it's so insightful. What did you think of the article?
Yeah, I mean, everything. Yes yes to everything you said. And the 3 things he lists are 3 that come up very often. Especially for me, the third one you have on your list here, delaying. Which is from previous editions, the idea that you don't take an action now. You say, I want to do something later. I'll jump in later, and I'll just sink down to be later in the initiative.
Right.
That I see that all the time.
Right. It's something that I think is natural, or I don't even know if it's natural for somebody who's not versed in the rules to want to do, but it's definitely something that someone who's played a lot of different editions want to do, because there can be such a tactical advantage to delaying, and it's been in the rules before. Personally, I'm glad that it's gone, and I think you are too, because it caused such problems in rules with things like an effect will last until the start or the end of your turn. Well, I delay. Then you have to keep track of when things begin and end, and also where someone's initiative count is. And sometimes some rules you would move in the initiative count, some rules you would remain in the initiative count. So it was a complicated it was a complicated mess for rules. And so I am glad it's gone. But as David points out, it's something that players want to do, and you just have to say, this is, you could ready. There's a rule for readying. So you might want to take that tact. The other 2 things are things that both experienced players and new players like to try to do, and I think that's more important, though, these 2 to keep track of or be aware of, because if it's something that a brand new player wants to do, then that might be something worth looking at in terms of the next iteration of the rules, to find a way to allow, even though there isn't, it's not modeled in the rules, and it's not modeled in the rules for good reason.
Right.
The one he talked about is called shot, which is, I want to shoot the ogre in the eye, or the cyclops in the eye. I want to shoot the wand out of the mage's hand. Something that people always say that they want to do. The problem with it, as always, is it becomes a shortcut to winning, right? It becomes an instant win button. And as many of those rules that can be removed from the game as possible is good. It cuts down on the narrative power of the game, but it shores up a loophole in the mechanics of the game that are easily exploitable.
I like what you said there about the kind of the intent of what players are going after. And I think there's 2 levels of intent. One is the person who's really like, I want to win, press the win button by blinding them. But there's also that new player angle, or that creativity angle that you want to enable. And for me, this one and the other one that's in the article, I think, are about improv skills, right? So like if someone says to you in genuine faith, right, I want to try to blind the cyclops, so they just realize, wow, they've got one eye. If I can do that, it's a big win.
Yeah.
And that's where I would say, well, okay, I'm going to improvise what you need to do for that to happen.
Mhm.
Maybe some kind of check, and the result will be that maybe they're blinded for a round and you do no damage.
Right.
Right? There's blood kind of, you didn't quite hit them in the eye, but you cut them right above it, blood's coming down, they can't see for a round. And that's a really neat, rewarding effect. And it could be hard and all that sort of thing.
Right. And it's not overpowered.
Right.
Because there's already sort of like this aid or help mechanic in the game. So you could just use that to aid multiple people for a round if you make this easy, hard, or difficult check. Yeah, that's a good way, Teos, I think, of saying, narratively the player wants to do something, translate it mechanically into the game in a way that's not an instant win button, but that rewards that player for being creative and narrative.
Yeah, and something I always look at when these situations come up is, how can I live with the ruling I'm making now if they tried to make it again? And usually I just find a way that mentally that I could say it just doesn't work the next time, right? Or maybe like if you did it a second round, the giant's just shaking its head from side to side, and then it doesn't work.
Right. He's guarding against it now.
Yeah.
Yep. And the third action that DM David talks about is readying outside of combat. The ready action is an in combat action, as Jeremy Crawford so eloquently puts it. So when people are outside of combat but they want to ready, how do you handle it? And in this case, I think DM David's what he tells players is spot on, right? You are always ready outside of combat. That you're an adventurer. So unless you're surprised, you are ready, but so is your opponent. So therefore, everyone's readied. So therefore, no one's readied, right?
Yeah.
And that's the way it should be. What I like to do narratively, though, is when I'm writing an adventure or if I'm DMing something, reward players who do describe what their character is doing. You walk into a cavern and you see the ceiling is covered with webs. What are players instantly going to do? I look up at the ceiling. If there are spiders up there, give them advantage on their perception checks. Give them advantage on their initiative roll when combat starts. Or twist that. Oh, I look up. Okay, everyone's looking up. The enemies tunnel up from below. So unless you specifically say, I'm looking down, you have disadvantage on your perception check or your initiative roll. So you can play that many different ways, but it can be fun for players to narratively describe what their character's doing and then have a small but significant mechanical effect based on that.
Yeah. And even just a narrative effect, it doesn't necessarily have to change the combat, but if they describe sort of how they're getting ready outside the door and then bursting in, you can just describe the other monsters as being taken by surprise, stopped in the middle of whatever they're doing, but they're still rolling initiative normally. But you give them that feeling of satisfaction of you interrupted what they were doing.
Yep.
Now they're reacting to you.
Yeah. Yep. The narrative begets narrative in that sense. And if the characters are taking the time to do that, it's probably because they enjoy that. So they're getting joy back for the joy that they're giving.
That's awesome.
All right. Next bit of news. Exploring Eberron from Eberron creator Keith Baker has been released on the DM's Guild. It is a 248-page book written by Keith himself, stuffed with lore, giving depth to topics such as the Dwarves of Muir Holds and the 13 Planes. You can get it for $30 for the PDF or $60 for the hardcover. I've purchased it, but I haven't read it yet. But if you do want a detailed review, or in this case, preview of it, Mike Shea, Sly Flourish, did an hour-long episode on his Lazy DM prep that previews the product. So have you had a chance to look at it, or?
Due to Gen Con, I have not, though I am very lucky to live in Portland. And prior to all this business of COVID, I did, in fact, get to hang out with Keith and talking about this book when he was sort of mid-work on it. And he was sharing the details of what was in it. And then I saw that cover art, which is awesome looking.
Yeah.
So I will definitely be picking up the hardcover for this. It is really neat. What's in here, the maps, the art. I mean, it looks basically Keith has made an official D&D book.
Yep.
About, just one tiny shade less than super official, right?
Exactly. And that's what's great about the DM's Guild for people like Keith and Ed Greenwood, of Forgotten Realms fame, because now they have a place to sell these goods. For 4th edition, for 3rd edition, for any previous edition, Keith, who is a great game designer, great creative mind, would not have been able to do any of this unless it had a Wizards official stamp. Now he has a place to sell this stuff that he loves so much, and he's had such an integral part in for the fans, and actually make money off of it.
And in the past, you would see somebody like Keith or Ed, someone would say like, I really want you to make a book on blah. And they would say, I would love to.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see if Wizards ever does that.
Right.
And decides to bring me on. And now, this can happen as long as it's one of the open properties that's on the guild. They can, creator can actually do that. It's great.
So, and just a little inside baseball, doing a little math in my head, I would strongly bet that Keith is going to be able to make more money doing it this way than he would have if he had written for an official Wizards of the Coast book.
Yeah, when you're paid by the word, even if he's getting a word rate, let's imagine he was getting 20 cents a word. I'm sure that being a Mithril seller, today, this has already beaten that by a fair bit, and will continue to beat it soundly over time. So it is nice to see creators have a way to get real money.
Yeah, and not only is Keith, profiting off of this, but so are the other contributors and layout and art and all of that. Yeah. So it's a lot more work for a creator. Obviously, you can't just drop the words off and have other people do it. But if you want Keith's vision without going through the Wizards of the Coast process, here it is. Everything that you want for your hard-earned Eberron dollars or gold pieces.
Yeah. Highly recommended.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the next thing?
Yeah, so Empty Black also released something on the DM's Guild again because he is so amazing, so prolific, and it's the Eye of Kolthis. It is supporting the Mythic Odyssey of Theros hardback that just came out from Wizards of the Coast, and this is a short adventure covering levels 1 to 4. And it deals with a temple of the god of destiny, Klothys, which is really cool. I think it's a she. She sort of represents the fates element out of Greek Roman mythology. Her hair is the strands of destiny and fate. And so suddenly the oracle goes silent. People send messengers to get some kind of information back, and the messengers don't return, so you're sent to investigate. It has a heavy theme of prophecy. Also has a lot of aquatic creatures in it. They're very richly well described encounters. It's the usual great work from Empty Black. So if you want that sort of deity heavy fun adventure for Mythic Odyssey of Theros, this is a great thing to pick up. And the layout's beautiful. It's done by Rich Lescaflair. It's a DM's Guild Adept release.
Nice. And one more bit of news that Teos wanted to mention.
Yeah, so Dragon Plus usually gives away maps, and the latest issue, which is all about the Icewind Dale information, it includes maps from the Theros book that you can download for free, and it includes 2 maps from the Acquisitions Incorporated book that you and I worked on.
Oh, nice.
And these are 2 that happen to be from the parts of the adventure that I wrote: Lottie's Palace, which is sort of a gambling den, and the Horn Enclave, a dwarven location. Nice. Both of these were maps that when I started working on them, I thought, this is insane, this will never work. And somehow I handed in my scrawl, and Jared Blando, the cartographer, who's from Portland, turned them into just amazing maps, and you can get them for free.
Have you met him personally?
We've always had, yes, actually I met him at Gen Con, but before we really knew each other very well. So it's just a quick hey, you did a piece of art that was in a a Dungeon Magazine article. And so we said hi very briefly, and then later realized we were both in Portland, have wanted to get together and never have, and now COVID.
All right. Yeah. So now it will be delayed yet again. Well, all this talk of the Odysseys of Theros hardback. At some point in the near future, a week, 2 weeks, somewhere down the line, we will be taking an in-depth look at that book, talking about what's in it and how you can use it for your game. But this week, our main topic is going to be part one of probably a 2-part series on exploration. We're calling it, because we are witty chaps, Exploring Exploration. And since the brains behind D&D mentioned the 3 pillars of combat, or I'm sorry, 3 pillars of D&D: combat, exploration, and interaction role-playing, I've had a new appreciation for adventure and encounter design, as well as overall game design. Those 3 pillars are a great tool for analyzing how and why people play D&D, and then a great structure for synthesizing encounters and adventures and games. So the topic came up recently, and it shows the confusion that exploration as a pillar has versus the more condensed mechanic for overland travel. If you say exploration to some people, their mind just says, oh, that part of the game is where you go across the map. And that's all they think of exploration as, when really it's a much deeper topic. So that's what we're going to focus on in this part today, is sort of what really is exploration, why is it so hard to deal with, and what are some tips for at least getting started using exploration in your games. And then we will get into more detail in part 2 next week.
Sounds great. Yeah, and I thought of this topic has been in my mind because of a couple of different things. One is a number of people on Twitter discussing exploration as a pillar, and yet almost everything they were talking about was that overland travel angle.
Mm-hmm.
And a Reddit post came up that walked through the rules for overland exploration. And again, it was sort of treated by many as if this was synonymous with all of the pillar.
Mm-hmm.
And they walked through the rules. It was a very interesting response. Some people said, yeah, see, the pillar works fine and overland exploration works fine. And other people said, that's a very dense system. I can't run this every single game. Like, this isn't going to work. And then other people said, I would like a more complicated system for this.
Right.
And I think it just comes back to how the pillar is presented in the books, which is actually quite confusing, right? I mean, the 3 pillars are combat, role-playing, exploration. And if we look at combat and role-playing, it's like you look at those and you go, yep, okay. Yeah, there's role-playing scenes, combat scenes, got it. And as soon as you get to exploration, you're like, yeah, that sounds right. And you're like, well, think about what else could be a pillar. Maybe puzzles. Well, that's exploration. Maybe it's something like investigating stuff. Well, that's also exploration. It's like everything got thrown into the exploration pillar.
Right.
Under one name that sounds a lot like crossing the land.
Right. Exactly. And it's funny because, we always talk about, or at least I always talk about, and probably will every week for the next lifetime, this conflict between D&D as a mechanical game and as a narrative tool. And so, combat fits perfectly into the mechanical game part, right? 3/4 of the rules are focused on combat. That's well documented. It's very mechanical. People who like the chess match of D&D, moving things around the board in a way that's optimal, they can get behind that, right? The narrative part, the role playing, we're going to laugh in character, tell jokes, interact with each other and with NPCs, and great stories and drama and conflict and comedy come out of that. There's the narrative side. And for me, exploration doesn't fit neatly into either one of those categories. And as you just said, it sort of everything gets thrown into that's not combat or role-playing interaction. So it becomes a big mess for DMs and players, especially when there, as you just said, are so many different wants and desires for the pillar out there. Some people want another 300-page book just with exploration rules that they can dive into. Some people want it to just be narrative and just sort of open up the world and show what's in it without really any mechanics needing to be involved. But there's so much there that you can't do it correctly using just either method. You have to use both or all.
And I think a lot of the folks who are talking about this subject, who are looking for help, are kind of saying like, I get those other two pillars and I feel comfortable with bringing them into my game, but I don't know how to make this exploration pillar resonate. I don't know how to, write it in a published adventure. I don't know how to bring it to my game table in a way that, I don't understand the toolkit, right? Whereas for combat, you understand the toolkit. There are all kinds of rules on how to put together a combat encounter. You have a whole monster manual, you have traps or things like that. But you don't know how to, where's the instruction booklet, the recipe for exploration? And it's because there really isn't one, right?
Right. And one thing that you did for the Acquisitions Incorporated book was to create these positions, right? These 8 positions, which in a way try to bridge that gap between mechanics, combat, and exploration by giving the characters with these positions the tools and the skills necessary to make a game of it while still having a narrative underpinning within the system.
Yeah, and that's something that it was really that Jerry Holkins, who ran the Acquisitions Incorporated live streams for the C team, came up with that as a sort of special thing that each character brought to the table to tie together that narrative theme. It was fun. I was looking at this article on comicbook.com where Christian Hoffer talked about how they sort of solved exploration. And this is really was sort of map exploration, was to take the idea of Acquisitions Incorporated having positions and created positions around exploration. To kind of tweaked and customized that idea of positions. That was awesome. So that then they, one person was like the navigator position, and another person was, and I forget what all the rules that they came up with. But it was that really neat idea of like, okay, you can do this and customize this in really interesting ways. Let's see, so here they are: navigator, scout, lookout, forager, tracker, cartographer, and lore gatherer. So little subtle twists to the positions that we created in the book so that it would fit this role, which is neat.
Yeah, that is neat. The positions for the AI rules covered more than just exploration, right? It did cover sort of this, the more of a role-playing aspect of being in communication with HQ and being in communication with other franchises and keeping karmic track of your franchise's ups and downs. So it's a little more expansive than just exploration, but it's a great way to ease people into the concept of not just role playing, not just combat, with some easy, simple to follow instructions and rules that empower the players to take on some of the burden of that.
And maybe let's take a step back, Shawn, if you don't mind, and say that the reason why these pillars exist, it comes off of a history across the editions where almost all of the editions, at least from 3E on for sure, have addressed the idea of player types, and that different players, and something that D&D started exploring in 2nd edition, different players want different things out of the game, but they don't want just one thing, but they sort of have a different pie chart, if you were to imagine it, of what components they want in a game.
Yeah.
And then you take everybody at the table and you sort of overlap it, and you get a sort of very interesting mosaic of what people really want and what you can do to please them. And so this study of the different types of play, of different types of players, can then lead you to think of what are the different pieces you can offer. And I think that's how the pillars ended up being designed for 5th edition, because the pillars are new to those to 5th edition.
Right.
And so you really benefit as a DM, as a creator, as a designer, when you think of the pillars that way. And the exploration pillar, the combat pillar, the role-playing pillar, they don't have to be separate. It's not like you have a encounter that's X and then the next one's Y.
Right.
You did a really good job in your D&D Beyond article series where you talked about how to write adventures about how you can combine these pillars and bring it together. And I think that's one of the key skills that we can, as we delve into this topic, as we explore exploration, we can really help people know how to combine those.
Yep. So I want you to talk for a little bit about how the actual rules, right? The monster manual, DMG Player's Handbook, how do they cover exploration? Because it's such an amalgam of various aspects of the game.
Yeah, and I don't think it's particularly great, given that this is a bedrock. The three pillars concept is like a bedrock of fifth edition. It doesn't really spend the time on exploration that it does on the other topics. And chapter 8 of the Dungeon Master's Guide covers exploration, but it's kind of all over the place. It has map travel pace, which then links to the player's handbook that gives you the ideas for travel pace and forced march. So it's sort of this weird thing of like, if you're in a dungeon, you're moving at this speed per like size of space on the map. It's a very strange take on it, and none of it is here's what exploration is, or if you're in a flying mount, or how far can you see outdoors? What's it like to track? Chapter 5 of the DMG, mapping a wilderness, moving on a map, foraging. The player's handbook has these rules for traversing maps and getting lost and things like that. And I don't, to me, the best thing is there's this piece in chapter 1, actually, of the Dungeon Master's Guide that says that much of a campaign involves the adventurers traveling from place to place, exploring the environment and learning about the fantasy world. This exploration can take place in any environment, including a vast wilderness, a labyrinthine dungeon, the shadowy passages of the Underdark, the crowded streets of a city, and the undulating waters of the sea. Determining a way around an obstacle, finding a hidden object, investigate a strange feature of a dungeon, deciphering clues, solving puzzles, and bypassing or disabling traps can all be part of exploration. And it goes on, but to me, this is the one piece that, and this is actually, it's like a sidebar. It's a little, it's a sidebar that's embedded in the text. But this needed its own. This needed to be somewhere else and highlight, and then more underneath on how to execute on this.
Right. This is the outline for a chapter on exploration, right?
Yeah.
And so for sure it needed to be elaborated on a bit more. Yeah,
because that's what it really says. Exploration is not moving across one type of map like outdoors. It's any movement, and it's also a trap. It's also a puzzle. It's also finding clues, interacting with a strange feature in the dungeon. And that's the recipe, right? But it's sort of hidden in this sidebar.
Yeah. So okay. So let's break it down at the broadest level. What is the exploration pillar?
So I think of this as any kind of engagement with the world.
Okay.
And I almost would rather it be called the engagement pillar, because to me, when we get to player types and types of play, it's really about wanting to do a thing and either see what happens or learn based on what you just did.
Okay. So it's the experimentation pillar.
Yeah.
It's The way I like to think of it is people, as we've talked about, they hear exploration and they go right to the dictionary definition, which is moving through and discovering something. I like to think of it as any time that you're starting with the unknown and moving toward knowing that's exploration, because to me that covers all of the things they mentioned above it, right? It's traps. You don't know what it's going to do, or you don't know whether it's there or not, then you do and you learn. That covers the strange things that you find in the dungeon that you're not sure what they do. That covers going over the map. All of those things. It can even be, in the role-playing sense, not knowing what someone knows and then learning what they know.
Yeah.
So you can kind of explore in a role-playing social sense, just as easily as you can explore in a sort of combat in a dungeon sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, any kind of role-playing scene where you're trying to uncover a secret or play out a certain strategy, that also tickles that exploration part of the brain.
Hmm.
And
So,
I think,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, to work this pillar, you want things to be interesting.
Hmm.
You want them to raise questions. So, if you're going to put the exploration pillar, how do I have some exploration aspects in this dungeon room? Then those things have to happen. Something must be interesting to where players go, huh? And there are these questions that you want answers to.
Hmm.
And then that interaction, whatever it is that they're going to do with it, which can be very free form or it can be very linear, prescribed kind of thing, the interaction then should result in something that's rewarding or validating in some way.
Hmm. Cool. So the keys to good exploration are what Teos just said. Um, raising questions and then finding those answers. Um, if you think about exploration in terms of the challenges, rewards, and consequences, that's another way of, as a creator of adventures, to come at this problem. So you set up, what's the challenge? It's not going to be a monster that they have to kill. It's going to be something that they have to learn about, get around, navigate. What do they have to do to overcome those challenges? What are the rewards if they succeed, and what are the consequences if they fail? And that's the quick and dirty outline of an exploration challenge. You don't have to come up with a complete list of the ways they can solve that. You can sit back and let the players decide, because some may have to, run through the door head first, whereas others may use magic to completely bypass the door. But that's okay. That's part of the fun of D&D, is you have characters that are good at certain things, characters that are good at completely different things, but both of those skill sets can be used to solve a challenge.
Yeah, and one of the nice things about the exploration pillar is that the challenge does not all need to be difficult for exploration as a sort of box to be checked off, right? Like I remember in an adventure that I wrote for you long ago,
Mhm.
there was a room where they were seeking this body, and I think the things that were on the body, and it was at the far end of the room. And sort of Indiana Jones style, a wall was starting to come down to close off that area.
Mhm.
And players then, and there were some things to fight, some monsters to fight, but it was this obvious, like, well, if you want that, you're going to have to find a way to get there, right?
Right.
And in fourth edition, there were a number of spells that mages could have, wizards could have, that could let them go straight to that area, like Arcane Bridge or something like that.
Mhm.
And players, when I would run it, they'd use one of those spells and they would feel like they broke the game.
Right.
And I would just kind of like, yeah, that was awesome. I wouldn't
Right.
say, but in my mind, I was thinking like, you didn't break it. That was the point.
Right. Exactly.
Like there
Yeah.
are easy ways to get there. You also could have just ran and not fought, right? So
Right.
there are ways, and it's rewarding regardless. But the players feel awesome because they feel like they bested it, right?
Right. Right. And you can put in rewards, or at least think about them, or create them if players come up with something that you never even thought of. So create those rewards. And again, when I say rewards, I'm not talking about magic items or gold or treasure, but like Taylor said, a sense of accomplishment.
Yeah.
Or, oh, since you all move through the door so quickly, half the monsters are still trapped on the other side of the door, making this fight a lot easier than it would have been. That's a reward.
Yeah. Yeah. And anything that's tactical in a combat scene that just adds a minor benefit, right? High ground, getting a way to climb out of the acid that just spilled, or a way to spill acid onto enemies, or any
Mhm.
sort of thing like that feels fantastic. And at low levels can make for really fun adventures,
Yep.
despite a very small mechanical effect. Like if you're fighting a bunch of goblins and you dump some acid out of a barrel onto them and deal just even 2 points of damage to all of them, that feels like a really cool
Right.
victory, right?
Right. Right. And that's harder to do at higher levels, because at higher levels, you're so used to having all your toys and buttons, and, the mage can cast the one spell and take everybody out anyway. But at lower levels, when you do have that limited range of abilities, something, as you said, Teo, something like that can feel incredible. And the other thing you can do is, in terms of if you're adjudicating how much power a certain encounter, especially combat encounter, might have, you can assume that they are going to do that. And so when they do wipe out 30 goblins with one maneuver, they feel like we just did an incredibly powerful thing. It's still a normal combat going on after that, but they feel like they have done this amazing thing, and they have, right?
Yeah.
But you're facilitating that and letting their ingenuity come out in a way that you kind of knew was going to happen.
Right. Yeah. And that the obvious, I think as designers, we think that the obvious will never work, or that it won't be fun. And I remember with Confrontation at Candlekeep, when you and I worked on that project, I did a room where I put I think it was a basilisk that was sleeping.
Right.
And above it was like a glass orb filled with some kind of weird gray thing. And it was basically gray ooze.
Huh.
And so, I thought, maybe this is just too obvious that you can shatter this and that gray weirdness is going to fall on the basilisk that's sleeping. Everybody's going to do that. But the reality is some groups really did just stealth by.
Yep.
And others broke the glass and they felt awesome doing it.
Right.
And I really almost didn't put that encounter in. But the last one was like, no, let's see. I think this can work. And sure enough, like, people really enjoyed having that as an option, and it didn't feel too obvious to them, which was surprising.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I can't really add much to that. That's very true.
Well, I mean, I'll say another. So this weekend, I was running an adventure you wrote, the introduction to the Icewind Dale Ice Road Trackers, it's called.
Mm-hmm.
And there is, in the second part of 4, there's kind of 4 small adventure parts to this. And then the second one, you get, and I'm not going to spoil it, but you're doing you're traipsing through the forest, and you encounter a number of sort of traps. And I really like the design you did, and I encourage people to look at this when this is eventually available, because you paint a scene, and it's exactly what we're talking about. You are painting a scene that is evocative. We're in this normal forest trail, and all of a sudden there's this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no way, as players, you're not seeing this thing and going, okay,
yeah,
what is going on with it? But yet, what I found every time I run it is people still want to mess with it.
Yeah.
They can't help but mess with it. And of course, there's a trap involved.
Right.
But it's compelling enough, it's engaging, such that you can't ignore it. You can't walk by it. You're going to want to do something with it.
Right. And it's not just, for certain players, it's going to be, if we ignore the experience points, we won't get the experience points. So we have to trigger it. For narrative players, it's in all the movies I love, they set the traps off. We talked about this last week, right?
Yeah,
we want to see what happens.
Yeah.
So let's see what happens.
Yeah.
And as a designer, thank you to both those kinds of players, right?
Yeah.
Thank you for engaging with the story. Thank you for trusting the writer and the DMs to tell a fun story, because you're interacting with the story that they're creating.
Yeah, and you're right. This really does dovetail into traps. I mean, traps are a big part of exploration, or a part, can be a big part of your exploration experiences, because they engage you that way, as we were describing last time, right? Good traps are ones where you want to be a part of it, and it's not just a all or nothing. And this is a great example of that, where it is a trap, or there's a trap involved, but it engages you. You want to work with it. How you approach it matters. Mm-hmm. And then there's a payoff, and the payoff doesn't just have to be positive, right? It could be damage, but you get a reward for how you chose to interact with it. And usually there's both positive and negative. I mean, it's something like, to me, I always go to the well of Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and you're looking at that golden idol, and you want that idol, and there's some sort of trap, and you can even figure out what the trap is.
Right.
But then you still have to engage with it in a certain way, maybe making a check to, how much sand do I put in this bag?
Right.
And that is exactly the excitement that it creates. And then all those traps you bypass now have a chance to hit you again because you got to run out of there.
Exactly. You can't stop at every single trap and disarm it. Yeah. So I think we've hit a good stopping point. There are still a lot of topics that we can touch on in terms of exploration, and we will touch on those next week, including melding all of the pillars together to form encounters that are bigger than the sum of their parts. Let's put it that way, as well as some overland travel rules and mechanics to touch on, and so on.
Yeah, and we could talk about how to make overland travel fun.
Yep. I look forward to that, and I need you to teach me how to do that, Teos.
Well, I'll do my best.
All right. So thank you, first of all you listeners out there. Here's where we would normally say to our patrons, thank you for being patrons. So I will say it. Thank you for being patrons. Although this week I wanted to ask a question of our listeners. So we're thinking about what format best serves us and our listeners. We are always going to be a podcast where you can just hear Teos and I blather on for 45 minutes to an hour. So fear not. But I want to know, would there be any interest in us adding a live streaming component to the show where we might use Twitch, say, to talk directly to you and answer questions from you while we're discussing topics? If it would be of interest to you to do that, assuming we choose a time when you could drop in and interact with us, let us know. Tell us on our Twitter feed at downwithdnd. You can go to the forums at misdirectedmark.com. Or you can just yell out your window as you drive past our houses that you would love to see us do a live show either every week or maybe just occasionally, where we can interact directly with listeners and with great D&D minds out there. So,
yeah, Shawn, I'd be curious whether people who want this sort of interaction, would they want it to be kind of periodic? Because right now you and I, we think, we do a good amount of working on what we want to talk about, thinking about it, sort of planning it out. Yep. So do they want us to sort of do that live?
Yep.
And then respond to questions sort of at the end, or do they want more interaction, kind of as we go?
Yeah. So, if you're a regular listener, or if this is the first time you're listening and you like what you heard, let us know what you think about that. You can also talk to us on Twitter. You can talk to me at Shawn.Merwin, or you can go, like I said before, to the forums. They're at forums.misdirectedmark.com, where you can give us your feedback. Teos, where can people find you on the internet?
I'm at AlphaStream on Twitter. I am blogging at alphastream.org, and you can also find me on the Misdirected Mark forums.
Excellent. Down with D&D is a Misdirected Mark production, the media arm of Encoded Designs. So, Teos, now that we have discussed all of this exploration, what do you feel like doing?
I'm going to pull this lever and see how it affects those monsters that are over there.
I bet it does some marvelous things.
It might kill them.
It might. Or us.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?
This whole party.
You down with D&D?
Yeah, you know me.
You down with D&D?
Yeah, you know me.
I'm down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?